could start off with talking about just your own sort of your own journey as you've learned a little bit more about attachment and your own attachment style.
Yeah.
And you've had a number of events over the last few years that have almost forced you to sort of examine your life.
Mm.
And you've really had to like relook at yourself because things just didn't go great.
Yeah.
And you ended up in a situation where you were wondering, how the heck did I get here?
Yeah.
And
A few
and you
times.
sort of had to go, yeah, a few times. Yeah, you kind of had to look at like what shaped me? Like how was I shaped to end up like this? It all seemed so normal before.
Yeah.
And and I was on this course, but it was a very unconscious course.
Yeah. And I think the
And
biggest thing I'm
suddenly,
battling with, I think the biggest thing I'm battling now is coming to terms with all those versions of myself. Is looking
sorry,
back.
you might have to repeat that because it froze there for a second.
And I think the biggest thing that I'm working on now is coming to terms with all those versions of myself. It's looking back on 19-year-old Nicky and 25-year-old Nicky and 28-year-old Nicky and 30-year-old Nicky and embracing her and forgiving her and accepting every part of myself. Well, now,
Right.
that's the hardest part that I'm struggling with.
Yes.
It's not.
Yes.
That's still a part of you that you have to forgive to move forward.
Wow, that is so profound. And
So
that
that's
this temptation to blame or to almost hate that girl
yeah.
because she was so oblivious and so
Yeah.
unaware of this path, literally a path of destruction that she was on.
Yeah. And it
And the
was,
temptation to just blame her would be very strong.
yeah, and to judge her and to almost shake her
Yeah.
sometimes. But
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
there's a kindness you have to learn for yourself. That's been the hardest part for me.
It's almost like this awareness is a double-edged sword
Yeah.
that highlights the previous ignorance and oblivion.
Yeah.
And now suddenly you have the sharp contrast between a life of greater awareness, greater self-awareness, and the previous life where you.
And it's such a shock. I've gone through quite intensive therapy over the past year, almost weekly therapy. And I've had a brilliant psychologist, Jody, who I've worked with weekly. And then again with you, watching you go through the process, which inspired me to go through the process. But it comes with such, like you said, a double-edged sword of seeing the world so differently than what you saw before.
Yeah.
It's taking blinkers off and the comfort zone of this the world that you grew up in and how you saw the world and was so safe. But it resulted in such a mess, actually. You ended up in a place where you thought you thought you were going in the safe, happy direction, and then you end up in a complete mess. And you have to stop and look back and analyze every friendship, every relationship, every reaction that you've had, every decision that you've made for the past 20 years of your life.
Right.
And that comes with a trauma almost.
Yep. Sorry, Nick, have you got you and I side by side on the screen? Can you, if you hit, there's a button there that allows you to, it's got.
Yes, now I do.
Okay. Yeah. It's as though you not only have to alter your view of yourself and your internal world, but there's this external relational world that's also now sort of thrown into disarray because you no longer, not only are you seeing yourself differently and like having to re-examine your values and your needs and your passions and your preferences you're having to also, sort of renegotiate all these relationships where people were used to encountering you in a certain way.
Yeah.
And now you're no longer showing up in the same way for them.
Yeah.
You're different. And they and some people will fight and kick and scream when you show up differently.
Yeah, that's been the biggest realization is I think I've become more and more aware of healthy people embrace your change and your growth towards healthier boundaries, healthier, a more secure attachment style, where your unhealthy relationships, it tends to cause a lot of conflict in your life. Yeah. Those people put up a lot of opposition to your change because the way that you were,
it's a threat to them.
It's a threat, and the way that you were reacting to them in the past was serving those people. It served them, and your slow progress towards boundaries, secure attachment style, a more kind of healthier reactions is not beneficial for those people.
Right.
So
yeah, there are benefits. There are benefits to having an anxiously attached person around you.
Yeah.
Anxiously attached people tend to be hyper vigilant, hyper attuned to the emotions and the lives of those around them.
Yeah.
Very, very sensitive to the emotional states of people around them. And often will go to great lengths to earn the love and approval of those people, because their own sense of their own self-esteem, they don't feel worthy of that love and approval just as a basis for living. They feel like they have to earn it, and so they're always extending themselves and focusing on people around them, ignoring their own boundaries. And it can be irritating for others, but at the same time, it can be very useful to have someone like that around. It's like having a dad with a lot of money who just wants to give it away. You got this person who's willing to give away so much
all the time
for your interest, and it can be extremely useful. And in fact, if dad stops giving the money, you started feeling quite entitled to it.
Yeah.
And when he stops, you get angry with him, tell him he doesn't love you anymore, and you want to boot him.
Yeah. And it's and all this time it's this huge amount of rejection that you're facing from these people that you used to perceive as your friends and family and spouse, and now you can't just gradually start moving comfortably towards this place of becoming more securely attached without getting this massive amount of rejection from people that were closest to you, because they got used to you, completely focusing on everybody else, and your needs were never prioritized. So you've got this. So what I've learned about this anxious attachment style is that your focus is completely on others. You're completely unaware of your own needs too. You have very little awareness of what you need in any given situation.
Right, because when one is so hyper focused on those around you, you are tuned outward, and there's very little capacity to actually look inward, because actually your inner life, your own authenticity, your needs, your feelings can be a threat to that perceived connection.
But then what eventually happens, like any relationship, it just builds resentment without you being in touch. You just gradually grow this feeling of resentment where you feel like my needs are not being met, because it's not anybody else's job to like really meet your needs unless you can express them, and you have no ability to express what you need or verbalize it. And so that person, other than just using you, can't ever get close to you, and it's not their fault either, because you can't be close to you, because you have no idea what you need. So you're never able to develop any real intimacy or connection with your partner or any of your relationships,
Right.
because
It's the great irony of this, actually.
it
Is
is.
the thing that you seek the most, which is the connection, the
Yeah.
fear of the loss, or the separation, the abandonment, is the very thing that you're perpetuating with this maladaptive strategy.
Yeah.
And it becomes you just eat and eat and eat, but you can never feel satisfied.
Yeah.
And in fact, you become obese and diabetic, and you lose a few limbs in the process
Psychologically,
from the
yeah.
gangrene. Right, psychologically. Yeah.
Yeah, psychologically, you're so unhealthy because you've got this relationship you're pouring into. You're developing huge amounts of resentment, and you've got no ability to form any real connection with this person or any people around you,
Yeah.
because
were you able to go back and sort of establish the early events in your life that started to shape this anxious attachment in you?
Yeah, I spent quite a bit of time, and I did some work with you and with Jody on trying to identify where it started and where this inability to identify my needs or even see what I needed was important. So I think going back as a child, I didn't feel like my needs were validated at all.
Right.
So there was an organization that I was raised in, a very religious organization, a quite traditional family
religion.
system, a very high demand religious organization, along with parents who also had their own avoidant and anxious attachment styles that I was raised and almost triangulated between. And that resulted in an oldest daughter and oldest granddaughter with zero ability to kind of identify what she needed, because she was so busy keeping everybody around her happy. And any sort of validation for negative emotion was ignored. So I did not get. So it was like kind of
you broke up there for a second. So you had this oldest daughter expectation around performance.
Yeah.
And holding up the family name, this little mascot who had to be very finely tuned to these expectations, because some of the family narrative was very much around a conditional type of love.
Yeah.
That when you get it right, you're in, and when you get it wrong, you're out. So that was happening. And of course, one of the things about anxious attachment is that it's characterized by sometimes getting it right and getting the love. In other words, sometimes it's an intermittent type of reinforcement. Sometimes you get it right and you actually get what you need.
Yeah.
And then other times you're met with an invalidating, dismissive type of reaction. And so you're getting this intermittent reinforcement, which drives the anxiety and the need. And of course, the thing about conditional love is that sometimes you get the conditions right.
Yes.
Especially in high demand religion, especially in families where there's a lot of expectation around what it looks like, how it's perceived, how it's seen by others. Sometimes you get it right. And then you get this rush of reward.
Yeah.
The reward center gets this rush, and it's just such a high that you want it.
Yeah.
But then the next 3 times you don't get it. And what happens with human beings with intermittent reinforcement, it's the best kind of reinforcement for reinforcing behavior. And well, the same with animals, actually. A pigeon will peck more consistently and over a longer time for a reward that's offered intermittently than a reward that's offered every time.
Wow.
A gambler will sit and gamble for hours because there's just that one chance that he could get that rush.
Yeah.
And so he'll sit there for the whole night and pull that lever because there's that chance that he could just get it. And so that type of intermittent reward drives this anxious, seeking, clingy in the child.
And it was kind of it was a narrative that you were the good girl and you had to be good.
Right.
It was a narrative. I was raised with a narrative that was, you're not acceptable just how you are.
Yeah.
What you need and how your natural desires, your natural opinions, your natural kind of just who you are is not enough. You needed to be this good girl. You needed to check the boxes of this good girl. And I was desperately craving a.
You broke up on you broke up on that last one, and so you.
And I was really craving a home where I was just accepted for who I was. Come as you are,
Right.
you are enough.
Right.
We love you
Right.
just the way you are.
Yeah. I mean, that is just such a natural projection of that, because the sense that you get is that my worth lies in what I do
Mhm.
and how I show up. On
Yeah.
the outside is where my worth lies. And the sense that I'm worthy of love and acceptance because I am just who I am becomes undermined.
Yeah. It was unconditional of checking the boxes that,
Yeah.
looked good,
Yeah.
especially in the society I was raised in, especially in the culture and the society of people and the group of people. And it was amazing because if you just checked all those boxes, you were loved by many people. 100
Yeah.
people would surround you.
Yeah.
As soon as you stop following
Wow.
the rules. And so it was a
Yeah.
really scary prospect.
You hit the jackpot when you got it right.
When you got it right and you conformed to every single one of those rules.
Yeah.
And you followed every single one of those expectations and you met them and you then you were surrounded by like 100 people and you were just in the middle and you were praised and you were supported. And it was a scary prospect. I mean, for a child to be rejected by a community, especially when it was such a large community. But it definitely meant putting aside your own, the way, I mean, this was even talking about the way you dress, what you drink, what you eat, what you say.
Yeah.
It was that specific.
Yeah, the kind of makeup you. Yeah.
Yes, the clothing.
How many earrings you have in your ear?
Yeah, who you date. It was very, very specific. You met those expectations and you would be included in this massive community of hundreds of people. If you dared have a different opinion, if you dared wanted to dress a different way, wear different, say different things, drink different things, eat different things, then you were out. And that was a very scary prospect. So you have to put aside that part of you that wants to wear something different, that doesn't suit that style of clothing.
Yeah. Essentially, you're putting aside your authenticity.
Because
you're being forced to choose between conforming or being authentic.
Yeah.
And a child will always choose the safer option of conformity. Your primary driver as a child, the first fear you develop as a child at about 3 days old, it starts to manifest, and then it's full blown by 10 days, is fear of separation.
Yeah.
Rejection is a form of separation. Any of these things you're talking about are forms of separation, of abandonment. So this primary fear is well developed by 10 days old. And when a child has to choose between that fear and autonomy, they're going to choose the connection or the perceived connection every day.
Mm-hmm. And they will give up that version of themselves that
they will
connects
give up
or any sort of identifying or sharing your emotions.
Yeah.
So the second part of that for me was that there was the narrative of you must be happy because you are part of this religious group. Because the results, when you live this religion to its fullest, you are happy. So any sort of unhappiness, any sort of negative emotion that might be displayed by you is completely rejected, and you are told that you are obviously not living this gospel correctly. This is an indication. Your negative emotion is an indication of your unrighteousness, basically, or that you might be doing something wrong. And so you put aside your negative emotion, and you're told when you do
Yeah.
express any negative emotion, you're told count your blessings, be grateful,
Yeah.
should not be
Yeah.
unhappy. It's a sign of unrighteousness. You know,
Yeah. And work
you need to
harder
do more.
at it.
Are you paying your tithing? Are you attending church
Yeah.
regularly enough? You must be doing something wrong if you have a negative
Right.
emotion.
Yeah. Because the system is perfect.
Right. And there is no
And
space.
in fact, this expression of your authenticity, of some of your negative emotions, is actually it's an affront to the system.
Because
It's a
it's a
threat
sign
to the
of
system.
happiness.
Yeah. Right.
But actually, happiness is not the goal of human beings, and it's not the goal of living. Growth
Right.
is.
Right.
And growth does not always mean happiness. Happiness is an external byproduct of growth.
Right. It's
It's a
happy
fleeting
a happy
moment
coincidence.
here and
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Right.
Struggle is the point of life. And unfortunately, I was
Right.
raised with the idea that struggle means you're doing something wrong. And anger is not acceptable. And unhappiness and sadness are all things that should be put away very quickly. And mistakes are
Right.
definitely, there's no room for mistakes here.
Right. Yeah. So there's this, so anxious attachment has this first attribute you mentioned of this hyper attention, this hyper attunement to people around you, their expectation, their emotional lives, and meeting their expectations. And then the secondary ramification of an emotional regulation that's poorly developed because you're in a system that's discouraging you from experiencing the full gambit of your emotions.
Yes.
It's actually asking you to cut off certain parts of yourself, and most importantly, to not actually talk about it.
Yeah, it's not something
to
you
not express it, not give it a name, to not give it a context, to not go there.
Because it's an admission of guilt.
This exactly, yeah, it's an admission of guilt. Yeah, you will be condemned on it.
Yeah.
And so this fundamental capacity of emotional regulation, which is to name a feeling, to express that feeling appropriately, to provide a context around feel comfortable with the exploration of something that's alien or frightening or unacceptable. Like this basis of emotional regulation is then eroded in the individual.
Yeah. So that,
And
I mean,
so
the
you've got
Born
this
speaks about that, about the primary needs of children. And I love how he speaks about it's their very existence requires it. Just like our lungs require oxygen to breathe,
Yes.
Children need validation. They need parents who allow them to experience all the emotion on the human spectrum and validate it.
Right.
So parents who allow every emotion, we're not talking about behavior. There's a difference between allowing an emotion and allowing behavior.
Right.
But allowing a child to express an emotion doesn't mean that they're allowed to behave badly.
No.
So looking back at my childhood, one of the core areas that was missing in the essential needs of a child that resulted in this anxious attachment style was, well, I think one of the things was that there was no allowance for me to experience the full spectrum of human emotion and have it validated.
Right. Right. And validation is such an interesting thing with a child because it goes beyond simply saying, I can see that you're feeling sad now. It requires the adult to explore it. So they need to go, I imagine that you're feeling sad because your brother took your toy away from you. And that would have been quite upsetting for you. I'm sure you probably felt quite angry with him as well.
Yeah.
And I could see that your inclination would be to bite him right now. You actually flesh it out with a child.
Yeah.
It's a contextualizing. it's a exploring of the inner world. The adult shows this intent to understand and explore the infant's inner world.
Yeah.
So it goes
And they give
beyond
them
just
the
naming
language because the
it,
kids don't,
and
because
they give it a language.
our
Exactly.
kids don't have that language. You're modeling,
Right.
and at the same time, you're modeling to them that this is normal, that
Right.
not just that you understand them, but that this is normal human behavior, and that giving it language and allowing them to have the feeling is the quickest way to recover from it.
Right. It's your basis of emotional regulation.
And that's how and it's not pushing it aside. It's not, that's your fastest, your regulator is just that process of you actually fleshing it out, where it seems like from a, more unhealthy perspective, don't encourage it. Let's shut it out. We don't want that.
Right.
We
Right.
stop
we
it.
don't want our children to go there. Yes.
We don't want our children to go there. We don't want that negative emotion in our home.
Right.
But actually fleshing it out, like you say, is the fastest way to end it.
Yeah, exactly. What often happens for the parent when the child plays up with something negative is it actually triggers their own issues.
Right.
Perhaps they grew up in a home where they were not validated either, where they were ignored, or somebody else was placed above them or put first and they were second, or something from their past. As that child plays up, defies them, or wants to go against the command, their own sense of rejection, of abandonment, of being placed second is triggered in that moment. And those unacceptable, alien, frightening feelings come to the fore. And it's not a place that this adult has ever wanted to visit before. It was never visited with him. And the child's now bringing it up for him. And the parent's inclination is just to get away from it as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Including not going there with the child.
Yeah. And that's exactly one of the reasons. And that's exactly one of the reasons that I actually started therapy, was because I could see this dynamic that I was raised with developing with my own children. So my reactions to my children were getting more and more harsh. And I was getting to a point where I couldn't actually be around them at all when they were experiencing anything hard or uncomfortable or difficult.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't anything wrong with them, but it was triggering everything in me.
Right.
So my inability to go there myself, my inability to feel anger, my inability to feel sadness, it was so foreign to me that it was not okay for my kids to feel that emotion at all. And I couldn't deal with it.
Right.
And I began to almost resent them when they started feeling any negative emotion, because it was nothing that I could flesh out with them.
Yeah. And it was such an uncomfortable place for you.
It was so uncomfortable. It was like, it just felt, the thing in my mind was negative emotion was wrong. Positive emotion was right.
Right.
And mistakes and things that are wrong are not acceptable. It wasn't seen as this like spectrum of human emotion where we are human beings. We are going to feel all emotion, and all emotion is okay to feel. That's been something I've learned just in the last year.
You broke up their chords. Could you say that again?
That spectrum of human emotion has been something I've only learned in my 30s.
Right.
That it's
and the interesting, that it's okay to feel it all.
To feel it all. And my intensive therapy to help me learn that anger is not a mistake, that's actually a useful emotion that drives us, that we need to use and direct and express without being unkind. Or that emotion for me, that emotion of anger has been completely unacceptable as I grew up. But for me to learn now to accept it in myself, to accept that.
You froze there again. You might have to say that again.
I wonder which side it is. I wonder if it's
No,
you.
it's me. It's my side. It's my side that's doing it. I've got a problem. Yeah. Oh,
It severely
that
affected my
that
parenting.
that being okay with these feelings, just being able to go, I can cope with this, and it's normal, and
Mm,
it's not a disaster, and it's no indictment on me, no judgment on me. I can just go there.
yeah,
Is just such a critical part of being able to go there with a child.
yeah,
But of course, the problem is that you're simply passing on to the next generation exactly the handicap that you're encumbered with. Because as you're unable to go there with him, as you react to their emotion, as as you become fearful with their fear or angry with their anger,
yes,
or in other ways reactive, they're not developing these mechanisms that we spoke of being able to identify it, contextualize it, express it appropriately, because um, you you're simply escalating their own inner turmoil
yeah,
with your reaction. And so this emotional regulation ability is then like thwarted or hampered or completely hamstrung. But ideally, what the child needs to do is to be able to go, I can see my parent see my feeling, but it's not triggering them. So that means that you can actually look at feelings. You can think about what you think about. You can keep your mind in mind.
yes.
And it's okay because they're not getting panicked by any of this
Mm-hmm.
or frightened by it or reacting to it. And so emotions, can be thought about. And I can think about my feelings. I can think about others' feelings. I can start to imagine my mind, and I can start to imagine other people's mind.